You have lived in the city your whole life, and you've never stood here before. No one has. The bridge is glass, and you can see the cars passing 6 lanes below your feet. You keep walking anyways because there's something on the other side of this bridge that wasn't there yesterday. Then, the lake opens up in front of you, and you forget about everything behind you. It's May 22nd, 1971. Pods hanging over the water on legs of steel. Bridges of glass connecting one impossible thing to the next. Children running ahead of you towards something you can't quite see. Music from somewhere. The smell of the lake and popcorn and fresh cut wood. A man eating an ice cream cone standing at the railing, just staring at the lake like he's never seen it before. Maybe he hasn't. Not like this. Not from here. A little girl runs past you with her arms out like wings. Everyone is moving in the same direction, towards the center of the island, towards something, towards Ontario Place. And then you see it, a dome the size of a small planet sitting right at the edge of the lake, covered in lights even in the middle of the day, like it landed here from a future century and decided to stay. You get in line. You enter. The lights go down. 6 stories of screen in front of you. A helicopter lifts over Northern Ontario and your stomach lifts with it. Rock and water and forest stretching further than you can imagine. Then a canyon opens below and you drop into it. And then you're up again, flying over a country so old it makes everything else feel brand new. The woman next to you leans left. You lean left. Everyone leans left. When it's over, you step outside and back into the evening air. The lake is black now, and the lights of the Cinesphere are dancing on the water. Somewhere behind you, a band is still playing, and there are still families on the grass because nobody wants to leave. You think about coming back next week. Maybe you'll bring your mother. She'll probably love Ontario Place. You wonder if a city can really hold on to something this good. If something built this boldly, this publicly, this deliberately for everyone can stay that way. Toronto has a way with big, beautiful things, a way of building them and loving them, and then not quite knowing what to do with them next. You hope this one is different. You cross the glass bridge back to the mainland. Behind you, the lights stay on.
Yeah?
Adam, you ready for this one?
Ontario Place?
Ontario Place.
I have feelings.
Dude, everyone has feelings. That's kind of the whole thing, isn't it? Ask anyone who grew up in the city and they've got a story. First concert, school trip, their kids in the water park.
My parents took me when I was a kid. I remember crossing the bridge and looking down at the cars underneath my feet.
Adam, that bridge gets everyone.
It does. And now, here we are.
Here we are.
With Adam Vaughan.
With Adam Vaughan.
Who, I have to say, and I mean this with full respect to the man, spent years fighting to keep Ontario Place public. Standing up in the House of Commons, Ontario Place for all, the whole thing. And now he's the spokesperson for the spa company, who at the time they won the bid had one operating facility.
In Bucharest.
In Bucharest, Romania. One spa. And they got a 95-year lease on Toronto's waterfront.
Which is a whole conversation.
It's several conversations.
And before we go too far into that, we should probably say one thing out loud.
Yeah, we probably should.
Therme has come on board as a sponsor to sponsor future podcast episodes. So when they heard we were doing an episode on Ontario Place, they reached out and they offered to sponsor us. So you will be hearing from a different Adam, Mr. Adam Vaughan.
Hi, I'm Adam Vaughan. I'm a former member of Parliament and Toronto City Councillor representing downtown and the waterfront. And I'm currently a senior advisor to Therme, the company that's building the spa and water park and wellness facility on the West Island at Ontario Place. When I was the city councillor, I was part of a process that helped rebuild and create 33 parks in the downtown core, and I'm really excited about the project we're working on now.
Because we think this story is complicated, and to pretend it isn't would be untruthful.
And also very un-Toronto.
Exactly.
Not the least of which was the fact that I just said it with the second T. What kind of Torontonian am I?
But here's the thing about Vaughan. Whatever you think about where he's landed, the man has been in this fight longer than almost anyone. City council, parliament, waterfront policy. He knows every corner of this file. And that perspective, complicated as it is exactly what this story needs.
I don't disagree with that. I just think the complication is worth naming out loud.
So we named it out loud.
We named it out loud.
Because the story of Ontario Place is bigger than any one person's position on it. It's about what happens when a city builds something genuinely extraordinary for its people and then doesn't quite know how to hold on to it.
Which is a very Toronto problem.
It's the most Toronto problem there is. Big ambition, complicated follow-through, and a waterfront that this city has been arguing about since before you and I were even born.
And today we are talking about Ontario Place.
Yeah, we're talking about Ontario Place.
I'm
Grace
Weiser.
Miller.
I'm Adam
This
Weiser.
is Muddy York.
Is Muddy York.
And this
Is Muddy York.
is Muddy York. To understand what Ontario Place was, you have to understand what Toronto wasn't. It is 1965. Canada has two major cities, Montreal and Toronto. And if you asked anyone in the world which one mattered, they would have told you Montreal without hesitation. Montreal was the financial capital of the country. It had the head offices, the culture, the restaurants, the nightlife. It had an energy that Toronto, with its conservative politics and its empty streets on a Sunday, simply couldn't match. And then Montreal did something that made the gap feel even wider. The city hosted Expo 67, a World's Fair, which sounds modest until you understand what that actually means. A World's Fair is when dozens of countries come together and each one builds a pavilion to show the world who they are and what they can do. The best architects, the most ambitious engineering, the most forward-looking ideas about what the future looks like. All of it in one place for one summer. Expo 67 was the greatest World's Fair of the 20th century. 50 million visitors, architecture that stopped people in their tracks. A young politician named Pierre Trudeau, who would become Prime Minister the following year, became a symbol of a Canada that was modern and confident and ready for the world. Montreal that summer felt like the center of everything.
If you go back to sort of the mid-60s,
That's Adam Vaughan.
Toronto was Canada's second city. Montreal was really sort of seen as the international powerhouse. It had just created, Pierre Trudeau and sort of wave of hip, modern coolness.
Toronto watched all of this and felt the sting of it. The province of Ontario decided it was time to clap back. A showcase for Ontario, for its cities, its industries, its culture, and its people, built on the edge of Lake Ontario for everyone to see. There was just one problem. Toronto's waterfront wasn't exactly inspiring. For most of the city's history, the waterfront had been an industrial corridor, factories, rail yards, warehouses, the kind of working infrastructure that a growing industrial city needed and that nobody was meant to linger in. Then, in 1955, the city built the Gardiner Expressway, an elevated highway that ran along the lakeshore and physically cut downtown Toronto off from the water. If you wanted to get to the lake, you had to find a way under or around the highway. Most people didn't bother. This was the waterfront that the province wanted to transform. And to do it, they hired a man named Eberhard Zeidler.
That is just an excellent name. Zeidler was a German-Canadian architect who had trained at the Bauhaus School in Weimar, Germany. The Bauhaus was one of the most influential design schools in history. Its philosophy was simple and radical at the same time. Beauty and function are not opposites. The most useful things can also be the most beautiful. Buildings should be honest about what they are made of and how they work. Steel and glass weren't things to hide, they were things to celebrate. Zedor's portfolio already included Sick Kids Hospital and would include the Eaton Center. He knew how to build things that were serious and ambitious and built to last. What the province was asking him to do at Ontario Place was something else entirely. His design called for 5 large exhibition pavilions, called pods, suspended over the water on steel legs, 4 stories above the lake. Each pod was essentially a square room, 88 feet on each side, connected to the others and to the shore by bridges made of glass. Inside, the pods would house exhibitions showcasing Ontario, the province's north, its cities, its industries, its universities, rotating displays that would change over time. A permanent expo that never got stale. At the center of it all, he placed a dome. The budget started at $13 million. By the time they were done, it was $29 million. Nobody flinched. This was Toronto answering back. Here is what $29 million bought in 1971. First, the land itself, because there wasn't any. The shallow waters at the edge of Lake Ontario, where Ontario Place now sits, were just that. Water. Open lake. Nothing you could build on. So, the engineers created something out of nothing. They dumped landfill into the shallows, truckload by truckload, construction waste, excavated soil from downtown building sites, until 3 islands rose from the lake where there had only been water before. But then they had a problem. Lake Ontario is not a gentle body of water. It is 680 square miles of fresh water that can whip up waves tall enough to swallow a car when the wind comes off the south. Landfill islands sitting in open water wouldn't last a season. The waves would eat them alive. Although, can you eat something alive when it's just dirt? Nah. In any case, the engineers came up with a solution. They took 3 decommissioned cargo ships, the kind of vessels that had spent their working lives hauling iron ore and grain from one end of the Great Lakes to the other, ships the length of 2 city blocks, and then sank them in the shallow water just offshore, positioning them in a line to form a barrier reef between the open lake and the new islands. 3 massive steel hulls sitting on the bottom of Lake Ontario, breaking the waves, protecting the islands, holding the whole thing up. Ontario Place was built on sunken ships. That's not a metaphor, that is a feat of engineering.
Pods were actually subject to erosion even back then, and it became destabilized during construction. And that's when they brought in landscape architects to try and protect the pods, and they dumped all kinds of construction waste in the lake, create these artificial islands, the West Island being one of them. But they also sunk 3 lake freighters as break walls to try and protect the pods. So it was always kind of a plan that was sort of written off the back of a napkin.
Now, what they built on top of those islands? The pods were 5 large exhibition pavilions, each one suspended on steel legs over the surface of the lake. Not beside the water, over it. You walked out onto a bridge of glass, and underneath your feet was Lake Ontario, and above your head was this massive steel and aluminum structure hanging in the air like it had decided gravity was optional. Inside, the pods housed exhibitions about Ontario, the north, the cities, the industries, rotating displays that were meant to keep the place feeling fresh year after year. But the pods were not the thing that stopped people in their tracks. That was the Cinesphere. Imagine a golf ball the size of a building, 90 feet high, 120 feet across, sitting right at the edge of the lake, covered in lights, visible from the other side of the water on a clear night. Inside was a screen 6 stories tall, curved to wrap around you on 3 sides. And playing on that screen was something nobody in the world had ever seen before in a permanent public theater. IMAX. The technology had been invented by Canadians, developed in part by a Toronto filmmaker named Graham Ferguson, specifically for Expo 67. The idea was simple and overwhelming at the same time. A film frame 10 times the size of a conventional 35mm frame projected onto a screen so large that your peripheral vision couldn't find the edges. You didn't watch the film, you were inside it. Incidentally, I once saw the film Apollo 13 at the Cinesphere, and it really, really makes a difference. Just those shots of the shuttle out in space. It's a thing. But back to history. The Cinesphere was the first permanent IMAX theater built anywhere in the world. On opening day in 1971, it showed a film called North of Superior, a helicopter journey over the Canadian wilderness, rock and water and boreal forests stretching to the horizon. The camera dropped into canyons and the audience dropped with it. It banked over ridgelines and the audience leaned into the turn. People who had grown up in Toronto and never been further north than Barrie were suddenly flying over a country so enormous and so old, it made the city beneath them feel like a footnote. Over 1 million people watched that film in the first year. And then there was the Forum. The Forum was an outdoor amphitheater unlike anything Toronto had seen. A circular stage in the middle, surrounded by fixed seating for about 2,500 people. But here is what made it different from every other concert venue in that city. The stage rotated. Slowly, over the course of a performance, it turned about 360 degrees, which meant that if you arrived late and got stuck with a view of the back of the musician's head, you just waited 20 minutes and suddenly you could be center stage. Beyond the fixed seating, the land rose in gentle grassy hills where you could spread out a blanket and watch from wherever you felt like sitting. No assigned spots, no extra ticket, just grass and music and the lake in the background. Up to 120 concerts a season ran from late May to early September.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, as I said, because it wasn't specifically ticketed. If you were in the park, you could just drop by and see something you didn't expect to see, like the Toronto Symphony. I think I thought Don McLean and singing American Pie there one summer night. There was sort of no seating capacity. You just climbed further and further up the hill. And the way it was built with a copper roof, it had sort of these arches and tented sort of structure. So there wasn't really a bad seat in the house.
But the best part was that all of it was included with admission to the park, which cost $1 for adults, which is roughly $9 today. For those $9, you got the pods, the children's village, the Forum, the waterfront, the lake, and whatever happened to be playing when you walked past the stage. In its first 2 years, Ontario Place drew more than 2 million visitors a season. 2 million people who had spent their whole lives in a city with its back to the water, suddenly standing at the edge of it and wondering what had taken so long.
But the history of Ontario Place isn't really about the architecture. It's about what happened inside of it. Because you can describe the pods and the Cinesphere and the Forum all you want, and you still won't capture what Ontario Place actually was for the people who grew up with it. For that, you need to talk about a kid on a summer afternoon with nowhere particular to be and $1 in his pocket and an entire waterfront laid out in front of him. The Children's Village opened in the summer of 1972, a year after the park itself. It was designed by a British designer named Eric Macmillan, and it was unlike any playground that had ever existed in the city before. Foam swamps, vinyl pyramids that you climbed to the top and slid back down on, nets strung at different heights over pools of water that you jumped into from a trapeze, punching bag forest, a giant air mattress, rope ladders going nowhere in particular. The whole thing was soft. Macmillan is credited with inventing the concept of soft play, the idea that a playground should be made of materials that give way when a child hits them rather than the other way around.
You know, I remember I still have my coin. The premier, when we graduated in grade 6 back in the day, when you got your report card, we got a silver coin that you could use as a token to get into Ontario Place. I was lucky enough to live across the street from the family who engineered the Cinesphere. And so we got free passes at opening day. And there and after, I used to sneak in. My parents used to sail and they used to drop me off on the beach. And you get to go into Ontario Place for free if you landed by water. So We used to spend the day. We used to spend a lot. I spent a lot of my childhood down on the waterfront, down Ontario Place, and it was fun. Children's Village was a blast. The big bumpers that hung from the ceiling, the vinyl pyramid you tried to climb up and slid down, the nets you jumped into and then went on trapezes with. It was a blast for a young kid just to have fun. But as I said, it changed very shortly after it opened, and the world changed shortly after it opened, and the nature of relaxation and spectacle changed, and Ontario Place very quickly became something from the 60s, and as we moved through the 70s and 80s, and the luster the shine kind of dimmed a little bit.
3 years after the Children's Village opened, McMillan was commissioned to design a water park. He created something with multiple levels and stationary water guns and no fixed path through it. You just moved. The water park earned more press coverage than Ontario Place's original opening had. Sit with that for a second. You built the world's first IMAX theater. You suspended 5 steel pavilions over a Great Lake. You sank 3 ships into the bottom of Lake Ontario just to hold the whole thing up. And then the thing that makes the front page is a bunch of kids getting wet? On any given weekend, between May and September, you could walk into Ontario Place, pay your $1, and find the Toronto Symphony warming up on the rotating stage, or a folk singer you never heard of who turned out to be extraordinary, or a punk band from Hamilton that drew 15,000 people and nearly ended in a riot, which is exactly what happened in 1980 with the band Teenage Head. 10 police officers were injured. One fan who tried to swim to the show nearly drowned in the lake.
I warned you that rock and roll was a tool of the devil.
Every summer, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra played Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture at the Forum. The 1812 Overture famously calls for cannon fire in his finale, real cannons, the kind that make the ground shake. So, Ontario Place bought them. Each year, the Fort York Historical Board transported actual cannons from the Fort York and positioned them on the hill above the Forum. When the orchestra reached the finale, the cannons fired. The sound rolled across the lake. You felt it before you heard it. People who had been halfway across the park stopped walking. For years, it was one of the most beloved summer rituals in the city.
It was a space where anything could happen, and anything did happen. And as I said, on a Saturday afternoon, if you stayed long enough, you'd get a great show.
By 2012, Ontario Place had been closed for redevelopment. The gates were shut. The pod sat empty over the water. A place that had drawn 2 million visitors a season in its first years now drew nobody at all. And the Cinesphere went dark. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, the way things fell apart when nobody is watching. The dome that had dazzled a city on opening night, that had made 1 million people feel like they were flying over their own country, sat empty on the edge of the lake. Rain found its way through the seams. The interior that Ziedler had designed to make audiences feel like they were floating in space was cold, wet, and close to everyone. The world's first IMAX theater was leaking. For decades it sat. Governments made plans and shelved them. Advisory panels were struck and disbanded. Proposals came from developers and architects and community groups and went nowhere. The islands kept eroding. The containment fill kept working its way towards the surface of the beach. And the city kept arguing about what it owed the place. Because Ontario Place was not just a piece of real estate. It was a heritage property. In 2014, the provincial government gave the highest level of protection available under the Ontario Heritage Act, designating it a cultural heritage landscape of provincial significance. The Cinesphere and the pods were recognized internationally. The World's Monuments Funds placed it on their watch list. Architects from around the world knew it by sight. You cannot just do anything with a place like that, and yet you cannot leave it the way it was either, because the way it was falling apart. This is the problem that Adam Vaughan has spent the better part of his adult life trying to solve. Vaughan represented the waterfront for 20 years, first as a Toronto City Councillor for Trinity Spadina, then as a federal member of Parliament for Spadina Fort York, the riding that sits directly above Ontario Place. He served on the Harbourfront Centre Board. He fought to protect the Toronto Islands from airport expansion. Waterfront policy was not a hobby, it was the work of his career. In 2019, he stood up in the House of Commons and said that the Ford government had to put a for sale sign on Ontario Place. He called for keeping it a public space. Ontario Place for All was the phrase he used. It would become a rallying cry. In May 2025, he announced that he was joining Therme as a senior advisor and a spokesperson. The backlash was immediate. People who had marched under the banner of Ontario Place for All felt betrayed. The comment sections filled up. Nothing quite like a Monday to sell out your community, wrote one person on social media. Vaughan's response to all of that is worth hearing at length.
Ontario Place always had a ticket. Now it won't. You used to have to pay to get in to see the sunset. You won't have to anymore. There is concern about using the private sector's, sort of the opportunity that the private sector sees here to generate revenue to fix and maintain the public parts. That's been part of Ontario Place since long ago. As much as people like to pretend there weren't private sector operators at Ontario Place, the truth of the matter is the marina was, the restaurants around the marina, Pizza used to have stands down there. Even the NDP government under Bob Rae at Queen's Park brought in the Budweiser stage, which demolished the Forum, the free public environment, and produced a ticketed place that was run by a private corporation. There's always been a blend of public-private in Ontario Place. It's just more pronounced than it used to be. And I think that at the end of the day, what that gives us is sustainability, but also permanence on the water's edge and a year-round footprint that allows Torontonians to really sort of re-embrace Ontario Place in a new way. Is it controversial? Look, nothing happens on the waterfront that doesn't spark debate, and that's good for a city.
The blend of public and private was always there. What has changed is the scale.
But on balance, I think it's a spectacular building, a wonderful program. I think that the companies that are investing into Ontario Place, billions of dollars into Ontario Place to bring it back online and make it something for all of Toronto to enjoy and all the world to come and see. I think these things are positive ways to build the city. Certainly in the time of economic upheaval when our largest trading partner is turning their back on us. This is $1 billion+ foreign investment coming into Toronto to create, 700 jobs through construction and 600-700 jobs after construction and operation. It's a real economic driver on the waterfront, which builds the business model, which protects the things like the Cinesphere and the pods and allows us to operate a spectacular park. So on balance, lots of debate, but I think that if you look at the facts, look at the impact and look at what spectacle and what activities are going to be brought to the water's edge, on balance, I think it's the right thing to do. And it's one of the reasons why I joined the organization, is to make sure this gets across the finish line in its most spectacular, engaging, and public way possible.
The physical reality of what Therme is building is worth describing clearly, because the debate has sometimes obscured it. The West Island will house a large indoor wellness facility, thermal pools, mineral baths, saunas, water slides, more than 20 of them, restaurants, a swim-up bar, and it's the kind of place that European cities draw families for full days and cost roughly the equivalent of what a movie and a dinner would cost you. $30 to $40 for full day access is the price point that Vaughan describes. Affordable, he argues, not luxury. Around and above the facility, 16 acres of publicly accessible rooftop parkland and trails. On the East Island, a new 56-acre park with beaches, fire pits, gathering spaces, and a new concert hall roughly the size of the original Forum, designed to be used year-round. The contaminated shoreline cleaned up, the sewer systems relocated so the water around Ontario Place is safe to swim in for the first time in decades. The Cinesphere and the pools will be restored with the revenue that the new tenants generate. And, for the first time in the history of Ontario Place, no admission fee just to enter the park itself.
One of the first things is that it's going to be a place where people can go and jump in the lake. I think that's the most important thing Ontario Place is offering folks. Is a waterfront park that's free and open and accessible, 56 acres. 16 of it's on our building and in and around our building, and the other 50+ acres is on the mainland and the and the the Eastern Island. I think it's going to be a great place to be. The playgrounds, the beaches, the viewing spaces, the gathering spaces, the fire pits, the concert hall, the beaches, an acre of sandy beach, relocating the sewer system away from Ontario Place so it doesn't pollute the water, so it's safe to drink and wash yourself and jump in the lake and not feel like you have to have a medical test afterwards. You can walk. The beach will be accessible to people with disabilities. Right now, Ontario Place isn't.
There was also something in the plan that the original Ontario Place never had: a genuine Indigenous presence. The Mississauga of the Credit First Nations are partners in the design. The native species that grow below and above the waterline on the site have been selected with their guidance. The Anishinaabe language will be woven into the landscape, into the explanation of the terrain you are standing on. The constellations important to the Indigenous ceremony have been mapped into the ceilings of the new pavilions so that on the summer solstice, you can look up and see the stars align the way they align for the people who were on this land long before anyone built anything here.
The Indigenous Anishinaabe language will be part of the presentation, explanation of the terrain you're on, so you'll really feel like you're in the original Ontario of Ontario Place. You'll have the sacred fires and sites for ceremony, the sunrise ceremony, in the ceilings of these pavilions. Constellations at important times of the year are poked in the ceilings so that you can actually see the stars line up on summer solstice, what have you, and really understand how Indigenous people lived and saw this part of the world and how they gathered in this part of the world in the same way that Ontarians now gather and people from around the world gather on the same space. So you're going to have year-round cultural programming outdoors. You're going to have year-round recreational and cultural and aquatic programming indoors, and it's going to be affordable. And if you want to go just swim for free, you can do that as well. So we've created a real sort of celebration of the aquatic reality of Toronto as a waterfront city, and you're going to be able to experience it year round and choose different ways to experience it year round and do it affordably.
None of this resolves the legitimate questions about the process that got us here. The Ontario Auditor General found in December 2024 that the bidding process for the redevelopment was not fair, transparent, or accountable. The concerns about a 95-year lease on public waterfront land are real concerns held by serious people. The debate about what Toronto owes its citizens when it comes to its waterfront is not going away. But Vaughan's point, made with the conviction of someone who has been in this argument for 20 years, is that those questions cannot be the only questions. The islands are eroding. The pods are falling. The stratosphere is leaking. The contaminated fill is still in the ground. None of that gets fixed by the heritage designation. None of that gets fixed by a protest sign. It gets fixed by money and a business model and someone willing to pay for the work.
I think millions of people year-round having fun on the waterfront. Yeah, one of my worries is this is almost too much fun for Toronto. Go back start of the conversation, we talked about Toronto being a second city in the 60s and having a bit of a chip on its shoulder. There's always a sense in Toronto that you're not supposed to enjoy the city. You know, you're supposed to, you're supposed to hate the lease. You're supposed to sort of decry its thin sidewalks and small subway system. You're always supposed to take a shot at Toronto.
Maybe this is the most honest thing that you can say about Ontario Place in 2026. Not that the fight is over, not that every decision was right, but that the city is still capable of surprising itself, still capable of looking at a piece of waterfront that it neglected and mismanaged and lost and deciding to try again.
And start thinking about how do we get more people in the city enjoying the waterfront year round? And how do we reinvigorate this spectacle and make it spectacular again? And I think that Therme is part of that equation. I think the new 56-acre park is brilliant intervention and something that all of us on the waterfront have been chanting for years. Clean, green waterfront for all. And I think we're on the cusp of surprising ourselves again. And I think that's a great place for a city to be.
Go down to Ontario Place today and stand at the edge of it, as close to it as you can get, because the bridge is gone. The glass-walled walkway that once carried thousands of people over Lakeshore Boulevard, the same bridge that 23,000 people crossed on opening day in 1971, has been taken down. Not because the city changed its mind, because it had reached a point where it needed to be rebuilt. Right now, you can't get very far. The site is fenced, construction everywhere. The pods are still there, the steel pavilions hanging over the water, but you can't walk through them. Not anymore. Not yet. They're being reinforced, carefully held together while everything around them is torn up. The Sinosphere is still there too, wrapped in scaffolding, waiting. And beneath all of it, 3 sunken ships sit on the bottom of Lake Ontario doing exactly what they were put there to do. Holding the whole thing in place, holding it together until whatever comes next. But the children's village is gone, the forum's gone, the rotating stage is gone. The grassy hill where you'd spread out a blanket and watch Don McLean sing American Pie on a summer night is gone. And now even the way you get there is gone too. This is where Toronto always lives, in the space between what it built and what it's trying to become, between the thing it loved and the argument about what it comes after. In 1971, the city crossed a bridge and discovered it had a waterfront. Right now, there's no bridge, just a construction site, a plan, and a promise that you'll be able to walk it again. And maybe that's the real story of Ontario Place. Not just what was lost or what was being built, but whether the city can take something it once got so right, tear it down, rebuild it, rethink it, and still make it feel like it belongs to everyone when it's done. Toronto knows how to build something extraordinary. The question is whether this time we can make it last. We'd like to thank Therme for taking a chance in sponsoring local Toronto podcasts. Thank you so much, Therme. Guys, if you want to reach out to us, hit us up at muddy_york@outlook.com, or you can reach out to us on our social channels. That's Muddy York Podcast, all one word. There's 2 Y's in the middle. Muddy York Podcast. We're on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you find great content, we are there. And please, if you liked what you heard in this podcast, please like and share, rate and review. This is how people find out about great podcasts like this. We love our listeners. Thank you guys. Feel free to reach out. We're getting so much great feedback about the podcast. We love hearing from you. Thanks.